Hello, everyone. Welcome to In Good Company. This is a podcast that myself, Kevin Leahy, who is my colleague and partner here, and our firm Connecticut Wealth Management are putting together. It's a podcast really designed for business owners. We're going to have a lot of guests here that are business owners or work with business owners. And the whole idea is for folks to learn from others. We're trying to create a community of business owners, of which Kevin and I are too, that we can all share experiences, discuss challenges and opportunities, and really try to help each other out. So today we are very excited. We have longtime friend, Chris DiPentima, who many of you are probably familiar with. He's somewhat of a celebrity in this state, but he is a longtime friend. Many of you know him as the president and CEO of CBIA, but many may not know his backstory, what he did before CBIA. It's very impressive, and I'm excited for everyone to learn about it. But before we kick it off, Chris, I'd love for you to talk about the CBIA, what your role is there, what you actually do on a day-to-day basis, and what CBIA is.
Yeah, thank you both for having me. Great to see you, Dennis and Kevin. You're not only colleagues, but you are friends, as you mentioned, and so grateful to have you guys engaged with CBIA. Many folks don't know that CBIA is one of the largest and probably the oldest business association in the country, not just in Connecticut, but in the country. We celebrated our 210th year in business back in November of 2025. And it's a relatively complex organization. I didn't know how complex it was before joining the organization, even though I was on the board and had been a member for several decades. But because of the age of the organization and the breadth of the membership with thousands of members across the entire state and a variety of industries and business sizes, for a 60-person organization, it's fairly complex. We have 5 entities within CBIA, as well as 2 strategic partners, Concept and Ready CT. And the way I describe CBIA when I'm in an elevator with somebody or I've got 30 seconds with them, it's kind of a 3-legged stool supporting Connecticut's economy. First, we advocate on behalf of the business community, something CBIA has been doing since 1815, when business leaders came together in Middletown, Connecticut, to advocate for more industrial building in the United States. The second leg of the stool that CBIA does is we offer a variety of products and services to the members to help reduce their costs so they stay competitive in business. CBIA has been doing that for about 50 years, since the 1980s. And something that's been more recent is the growth of our events and networking opportunities so that business can learn best practices as part of the product and services that we offer. So we've been really growing that over the last 5 years. And the third leg of the stool is something that we launched about 2 years ago, which is the CBI Foundation, a 501c3 that does economic research on how Connecticut compares to other states in a variety of categories. Kevin's on the foundation board. Denis, you recently joined the CBIA advocacy board, and it's great to have you both engaged on 2 of the legs of the stool. And I know you often participate in our events and some of our products and services. So you understand the breadth of CBIA, but not everybody understands there's kind of three legs of the CBIA stool.
So, Chris, thank you. That's awesome. I have the good fortune, as I say all the time, of knowing you since nursery school. And then, of course, I have to say not our nursery school, but our kids' nursery school. So I got to know you a bit earlier on in your career, certainly before you did this. You worked for a very large multinational company and so forth. I don't want to tell your story for you. But again, this podcast is really about entrepreneurs and business owners and that journey. And I don't know that there's a better person to help us, kick this off than you, who in many ways represents all of us, big and small, on that journey. But you yourself have been an entrepreneur, and yeah, would love to hear you tell that story about how did you get involved in entrepreneurship way back when, and even before, if I remember. You claim to have been an attorney, to have actually passed the bar. Is this true?
That is a claim I'm sticking with based on some of the certificates behind me, Kevin. Yep. I don't know how I got through law school. I actually went to law school in order to make sure I didn't get involved in the family business. My dad had started in 1989. He was a real serial entrepreneur, had bought and sold several businesses throughout his life. And then in 89 started a manufacturing company where he bought the assets from a company that was struggling. My older brother joined him shortly thereafter. And all I heard during the 90s was at the dinner table was about the family business. And so I was like, there's no way I'm getting involved in this business, even if I had the opportunity. And so I did go to law school. I came back, went to Quinnipiac Law School, which brought me back to Connecticut, and practiced law for about 8 years, mostly in the litigation trial sector. And during that period of time, had the opportunity to represent several businesses, many family owned, saw that I really was envious of how they were making tangible impact in their communities, whether it was a hardware store that I was representing or a Waterbury manufacturing company. And so what I was doing was offering them guidance and advice and counseling as a lawyer, but there wasn't a real tangible asset to it or a tangible part of it. And I really appreciated the impact they were having in their communities with a lot of events that I attended. So that was drew my interest. And when the opportunity came to get involved in the family business, to say yes, and probably there was a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit in my DNA, given my father's background as well. But I actually went to law to avoid the family business, and then it eventually brought me to them.
And ended up, if I remember, you were running it, right? You ultimately sold, and but you were the guy at the top.
Yeah, I joined them in 2001 and kind of learned my way through the organization, first coming in and overseeing HR and a new business that they acquired, then expanded and oversaw the finance piece of the business. Eventually became vice president of operations, so I was running the operations and supply chain piece. And then 4 years later, did take over for my dad in 2006 and became the president and CEO of the family's organization, and working with a lot of great outside people and the staff that we had internally. My older brother, we grew that business quite a bit. And as you mentioned, I ended up selling it in 2016 through a process that we ran ourselves and looking for a strategic buyer who would help us take the business to the next level, but while maintaining the culture that we built, that family-like atmosphere, which was really interesting trying to thread that needle. But I think we found the right suitor, and Leggett and Platt, which was headquartered in Missouri, Connecticut, which is a $7 billion market cap, publicly traded company we sold to in 2016. And so overnight, I went from a small privately held family business to all of a sudden learning things like Starbucks and inventory compliance, really fun accounting things that you two appreciate, and became part of a large publicly held company where I stayed on for almost 5 years before I joined CBIA.
Boy, if I had a nickel for every time Dennis tries to talk about inventory compliance, my
Well,
goodness.
It's either that or Sarbanes-Oxley. It's just fascinating.
Chris, sorry, before we move on, if you go back to, you're an attorney, you're learning a new business that you've heard Dad and your brother talk about over dinner, ultimately are running it. What sticks out as maybe a memorable lesson? What are the struggles, the challenges, right? We all have them. There is this wonderful glory, maybe if you succeed a little bit in business, but boy, oh boy, the struggles are real, right? As you think back to that family business where I imagine you were learning serious lessons in real time.
Yeah, it really was. It was interesting because when I became a lawyer, my first law firm that I worked for, my boss was a believer of trial by fire, and so I believe I passed the bar in like the first week of June, and he had me doing a co-chair trial literally 2 weeks later, and I passed the bar. But and then going into the family business, like you mentioned, it was similar trial by fire. I had never run a company before. Had never managed people before joining the family business. I was an associate at a law firm. I worked collaboratively with the team in trial preparation and trial execution, but had never managed people. Didn't know P&L, didn't know finances, and so it was really trial by fire. But as I mentioned, we had a great group of people that supported the firm, the manufacturing company, whether it was lawyers or accountants. I was a big believer because of my experience in bringing outside experts in. So whether that was Concept to help us with lean practices or creating a board of advisors to help us with guidance, I really leaned on my own personal coach and executive coach that I brought on board for myself, for the team. And so those were the people I gravitated to. I think the biggest challenge for me was when I first was leading people at Pegasus, our family's manufacturing company. I was really just driven to get everybody on board with any change we made, 100% buy-in with every change we made. And it took me just probably too long to realize that one, you usually probably aren't going to get 100% buy-in, and two, you don't need 100% buy-in in order to make change. In fact, there's really the mighty minority, as they call it, that can help change move through, because there's a bunch of people that just sit in the middle where they're okay if the change happens and they're okay if the change doesn't happen. And then there's those who resist the change. But you just need that mighty group to get on board with helping you get the change through, those change agents. So that was probably the biggest thing I learned early on. And it took me many years to realize I'm not going to get everybody on board with change. The other thing I realized, probably again too long, was when I first became a leader and certainly became the CEO, I felt like I needed to know everything. Everything I needed to be the expert on. And like I said, I eventually realized that I had to rely on outside experts to bring in the expertise, and also rely on the team to develop those expertise. And so those are probably my two early lessons learned.
What was the size of Pegasus when you first joined, and when you left? What was the size difference?
Yeah, so when I first joined, it was about 45 employees with kind of three divisions, three actual companies that my father had acquired and bolted on. And then when we sold in 2016, Dennis, so about 14 years later, we were about 140 employees.
Yeah. Yeah. Hard to gain consensus with 140 employees. And sounds like that leadership baptism by fire, you learn that, you can't always gain consensus of whether it's 40 or 140 people. You just got to lead, and you got to, which I think is part of that entrepreneurial story, and the business owner story is, as people will say, it's lonely. It can be lonely because you do have to make some of those decisions on your own and ask people to follow you.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. I read a great book. Actually, Concept had an event when I was at Pegasus, and they had a speaker who was involved in 9/11 and the opening of the New York Stock Exchange after 9/11. And he talks in his book about the 95-5 rule, where the 95% of the time he's trying to get consensus and buy-in from his leadership team. But he always provided his team there's that 5% where he's just going to have to make the decision, and they're going to have to support it.
Yeah, 95 is optimistic. I think that's pretty good. And so eventually, Chris, you and your brother, you sold the family business. You sold Pegasus. Was that always the plan? Was that the idea, the design that your dad had back in the day to build it and sell it? Or what brought you to the point where you said, I think now's the time to sell?
Yeah, it wasn't a plan all the time. I mean, my dad was always bringing people in and giving him a valuation of what the business was worth. But, deep down, if you know my father, I think he saw it as a legacy business, something that would survive multiple generations. And my older brother and I think felt that way as well. We were more against selling and bringing people in to give us valuations than my father was, who was always doing that. And we were just focused on running the business and probably getting it to the next generation. The main thing, so it didn't evolve over the time. The last couple of years before we sold, we had a lot of conversations with the board of advisors about, where are we taking this business? Are we able to take it to a true potential? We often talked about taking the governor off of the business, if you will. Like, you have a governor on the engine, it can only go so fast, because that requires both cash and human capital. And family businesses are sometimes limited. We also didn't have a great plan for the third generation to come in. And so, nephews, and starting to talk about getting involved in the business and how do you bring them in. We didn't have good rules in place about working elsewhere and then coming into the family business. And so we all knew that was going to be something that we're going to have to grapple with as well. And so we decided over a couple year period, let's take a shot at selling the business. We probably gotten into a good point where we can maximize what it's worth. We can kind of avoid that third generation of dealing with that challenge as well. And so we decided, like I said, to run our own process where we identified about 10 strategic buyers that we thought could take the business to another level. We had three rules. One, that they weren't located in the Northeast because we didn't want them micromanaging the business. Two, we wanted them to be well capitalized so they could grow the business. And three, we wanted some synergies from either a market growth, a sales growth, or a supply chain synergies. And Leggett was very much vertically integrated in the aerospace market that we were playing in. And so they ended up eventually coming out on top of the 10 that we identified.
Chris, were those, if you look back, were those the right requirements? If you had to do it over again, did you bring in the right people at the end of the day? Did you qualify the right 10 firms?
Yeah, I think we did. I think we probably were too skittish about closing off the Northeast if I were to do it over again, Kevin, and maybe with the right people and the right structure, be comfortable enough that there wouldn't be micromanagement. So if I were to not do one thing, I would say maybe not limit ourselves by, hey, making sure they're far away enough, because in today's world, you could be pretty much anywhere in a couple hours and be sitting in someone's conference room and do the helicopter management if you want, and fly in and then fly back out pretty quickly. So I probably wouldn't have limited to the Northeast, but I think we still would have ended up selling to Leggett when it's all said and done.
So you had 140 people, Chris, that you were responsible for, and their families, right? I mean, that's a pretty heady responsibility. How much did that weigh on the ultimate decision to sell the business? That had to have played a pretty big role.
They choose roles, Dennis. Yeah, no doubt. I mean, we talked about preserving the culture, right, with a strategic buyer versus maybe selling to private equity. We did talk for a long time about even doing an ESOP, employee stock option plan, where the employees would own the company, because that's one way to preserve the culture in a strong way. I'd say ESOPs in 2016 probably weren't as prevalent as they are today as a good option and a good choice. But the employee impact was definitely a top priority. The first generation impact, the impact on my father, was something, just making sure that this was what he wanted to do, because again, it was a legacy business.
So this, Chris, we do a lot of work with business owners, especially those that are thinking about succession or transition out of the business, selling the business at some point in their career. And we find a lot of folks kind of entering into that conversation not knowing what other options are. You just mentioned one, ESOP, which a lot of people, you mention ESOP and they say, what's an ESOP? They can't even spell it. But what do you wish you knew earlier before the process started, whether it was financially or emotionally? Was there anything you wish you knew before you started that whole process of finding those 10 firms?
I wish I knew or better understood maybe the emotional impact on that first generation, as I mentioned. Knowing who we eventually sold to, Dennis, and that actually that there were a lot of publicly traded companies in that list of 10. I wish I better understood the transition from private to public. It's not insurmountable. Obviously, we were successful in doing it, but it doesn't happen to a lot of organizations. And so talking to a couple privately held who became public overnight, that we maintained the culture. We did a great job there, but the processes, the compliance levels, it's another game when you go from privately held to public. And so I think that would have been better understanding. I know that if we had planned better, we could have maximized more from the earnings, right? We could have really maximized the bottom line. But honestly, for us, it wasn't all about the money. We ended up not even choosing the top bidder. It was more about maintaining the culture, quite honestly.
Chris, how about Dennis? I thought you were going to go. We talk about this all the time with kind of identity and concern. People regret selling their business, right? It's there's all sorts of studies out there and surveys and universally held that many entrepreneurs later regret it for lots of different reasons. Did you have a identity crisis at all, or a guy that used to be an entrepreneur and then was although I think you had a pretty big job at Leggett, but just another employee? Was there any? How'd that go? How'd that feel?
Yeah, I will say, selling the family business, the way I thought about it was, you are selling that kind of that shared sense of legacy a little bit, right? Your professional life is tied to much more than results. It's tied to the people who work for you, the families of the people who work for you. It's, as a second generation person, you're preserving that legacy of the first generation. You're continuing that dream, that vision. There's a pride that comes with working with a family business and trying to continue that legacy. So, when you sell that business, it is a bit of kind of selling that sense of legacy, walking away a bit from that legacy, and shaping that business. I'm fortunate. I didn't know this was going to happen. As you both know, when we sold it in 16, that a lot of those same traits exist at CBIA. It's kind of interesting when I look back. It's like there is that continuing that drive for vision in a nonprofit like CBIA. There's a pride that we have, in this team. I often tell this to staff at CBIA that it feels as much, if not more, like a family business here as it did running a family business, probably because of that. And we're preserving a 210-year legacy of an organization that's been around since 1815 at CBIA. So there's some interesting traits that I probably didn't realize and make the connections until after I came on board that makes me still feel like I've got that pride of that shared legacy, that family-owned business that we sold.
Yeah, I got to say, Chris, and again, I mean this sincerely, and I'm not just saying it because we're having a little podcast here, but I'm not sure I understood this when you took the job, but as time went on and recognized that, you guys are there to help the big companies just as much as the small. But the fact that you have had this experience in family-owned businesses and manufacturing, maybe in particular, and then part of a very large firm, your background almost seems perfect. I mean, it really does.
Yeah. Yeah, because a lot of your constituents in CBIA are family-owned businesses. You walk the walk. And then the other folks, you're dealing with the legislature. You got a bunch of lawyers around you, and you're a lawyer. I'm with you, Kevin. When you originally took the job, I was like, oh, that's interesting, but it's perfect. It does seem perfect. When you did sell, I'm just intrigued by that whole journey of going through the process of selling and then landing in the new spot. You remember missing something? Was there something that you missed? Kevin kind of touched on the emotional part of it about, on Friday you were the CEO, on Monday you're Chris. That's something that maybe you missed. But was there something else that you missed? And how about something that you didn't miss when you sold?
Yeah, I didn't miss. I would say probably, family businesses are interesting dynamics. There's a bit of an emotional weight that comes with them, an emotional complexity that comes with family business, right? You're especially second generation, so you're often compared to the founder. In my case, whether that was internally with the family that we had, the employees that we have, but even, as you guys know, I was very active externally with the chamber and CBIA, and often have people come up to me and say, hopefully you could live up to your dad, the man your dad is as a serial entrepreneur and really that type of person. There's family members with different visions, whether that's the people working in the business, my older brother, the third generation coming in, or siblings who weren't involved in the business at all, who maybe wanted to get engaged in the business, wanted to get involved in the business. So, and then you're often, I made a lot of changes, right? I'm not the same person my father was. I brought in a lot of consultants, third party people. I was very transparent with our metrics. We ended up with a profit sharing program with the employees, basically, that we rolled out. So we were sharing financials to see how we were doing. Things that, were not the same as my father. So there were times where I questioned, am I honoring his legacy and the legacy of the business, or am I changing too much? So one of the things with the family business is a lot of the decisions feel very personal, even when they're not personal. You're running a business, right? You try to put the business sometimes even ahead of the family, so that you have, because if the business does well, the family does well. Sometimes if you put the family ahead of the business, the family does well, but the business doesn't well, and then it all breaks up. So I mean, that was the toughest part, Dennis, is just that the emotional complexity that goes with a family business. I didn't really have an issue walking away from the stress and the politics and the emotional weight. I did, the biggest challenge, like I said, was just really, when you sell it, you're handing over a piece of your family story to somebody else. And even if it's the right decision, that goes on long after you sign the paperwork. I drive by there sometimes I even visit them because they're a CBI member. And I'm like, the legacy is not there. It's a different organization. It's a different company. There's a lot of different employees there now. And so that was the hardest part of it.
Chris, if you take your CBIA hat off for a minute, and you're sitting back, in Pegasus, or you're talking to a couple of business owners like Denis and I, what are the challenges? What are the challenges that most business owners medium-sized business owners are dealing with today? Is it much different than 2016 or 2014? Go back a decade, go back 15 years. If you were still, at Pegasus, would they be the same issues? Would they be different issues?
I think some of the issues are the same. Kevin, been talking about workforce for, I feel like in manufacturing, we've been talking about it since coming out of the Great Recession, 2010, 2011. Federal uncertainty, it's certainly different today than it was, but I remember going through, when Obama was president, there was sequestration. So there was, cuts in defense spending, and there was that uncertainty what was going to happen. Globalization was a big thing. And so how are you going to deal with global markets? So there's different type of uncertainty, but there was uncertainty at the federal and at the global level as well. I think the biggest change that I see today versus, then is the speed of cycles. The disruption of cycles, and this is both an opportunity and a challenge, right? When there's disruption, it poses you can create opportunity out of it, or you could get overwhelmed by it. It could become a significant challenge. Just going back 5 years since I've been at CBIA, and I feel like an owner of this organization. I want to continue this organization, but COVID, workforce challenges, labor increases, supply chain disruption, federal uncertainty, just like one interest rate increases, tariffs. It's like one cycle after another every 6 to 12 months. And so the speed of challenges, I feel, is a lot faster. AI and technology, I didn't even mention there too. Then where if I look back from like 2010 to 2020, maybe there was like, every 2 or 3 years, there was significant disruption. So it's a lot quicker now. And as a result, and I've been preaching this since I was at Pegasus and learned this lesson is, as a result, as a CEO, as an executive team, even as a first line supervisor, you've got to spend a lot of time outside of your business to learn best practices, to learn what's happening, to listen to podcasts, pay attention to a lot of frequency of news and media, primarily social, in order to stay abreast of those changes and how to navigate some of those changes. I was always a big fan of spending a lot of my time outside of my four walls, and that's advice I often give business owners and the executive team, but I think it's even more crucial and more critical now to balance out spending time outside your four walls, but obviously you've got to be internal as well and be part of the team.
Awesome advice. So say more about that, Chris. Social media is, if news, okay, fine. Reading, fine. How else do you do that? How would you suggest people? How are people spending their time, face to face, one on one? How Denis and I should be going to talk to whom, or manufacturers like you once were should be talking to whom?
Yeah, and I think that's why our events have grown so much, Kevin. We went from 20-something events when I first started here. We're going to do 65 this year, both in person and webinars. It's just not the number of them, the attendance of them. I think over 9,000 people attended our events last year. It's the content of the events, no doubt about it, but it's that networking that happens, that where you're talking about, hey, I've got this challenge to another business owner, whether they're in your industry or not in your industry. Everyone's got workforce challenges. Everyone's got cost challenges. Everyone's dealing with AI and how they implement AI in their businesses, whether you're Connecticut Wealth Management, a manufacturer, an insurance company. It doesn't make a difference. You're dealing with similar issues. There's nuances to them, don't get me wrong. And so when you're at an event, whether it's a chamber event, a CBIA event, if you're Connecticut Wealth Management hosting roundtables, you're able to talk to people, and there's just more pure conversation happening, where you can really help navigate or understand best practices. And I will say, that is something that Connecticut has that it's not the same in other states. I ran businesses in other states when I was part of Leggett. That close-knit, deep relationship community in Connecticut allows you to make instant connections with somebody in a 500-person room, because you ask them where they live or where they went to school or what their spouse does for a living. All of a sudden, you've got an instant 1 degree of separation, and then from there, you easily start talking about what you're navigating in your businesses. So that's when I talk about spending a lot of time outside of your four walls. You've got to do it on a regular basis. I think that's more important than even the things that are put out in social media, because social media can get overwhelming and tough to navigate through.
Isn't it fascinating too how much I think our experience has been, people want to help, right? People that, well, and I'll say, Chris, you and I are on an advisory board. We somewhat randomly were asked to be on an advisory board together. And nobody on that advisory board probably has the time to actually be on that advisory board, except we all continue to do it because it's awesome and it's fun and right, you feel like you're actually helping the company and the owners and the executives. And
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. So I have a, you know, of saying that I talk about a lot of time internally and externally, and that is you can't have innovation in isolation. Innovation doesn't just happen by yourself sitting in your CEO chair or your sales chair or whatever chair you're in. Collaboration.
Dennis, did you write that? Sorry, write that down. Someone's got to write that down. I don't have a pen. You can't have
Innovation in isolation, right? Collaboration drives innovation. When you're with people, when you're on an advisory board, yeah, you bring a perspective, I bring a perspective, somebody else brings perspective, but collectively we collaborate together, we talk about a problem, and that leads to the innovation and how you can overcome those problems. Kevin's on our foundation advisory board. Denis, you're on the CBIA board. That board is collaboratively driving innovation. What should CBIA be doing from an advocacy perspective, from a products and service perspective to help members, from an event perspective, from a research perspective? That's the importance of collaboration. And Connecticut, the collaborative spirit is as strong as I've seen it in any of the places where I've been involved in business or led businesses.
Yeah. Well, and you deserve a lot of credit for that too, Chris. I think the the community that you have created, which is kind of what we're trying to do here within Good Company, is to try to create a community where business owners can help each other. I used a phrase earlier about the loneliness. There is a loneliness being a business owner, and people, I think, are craving that opportunity to collaborate and to share ideas and look for advice. And I think it's awesome what you do. Is there something that you think folks are missing? Is there a critical issue that people are not paying attention to that you think they should be paying more attention to, that maybe they haven't been fortunate enough to go to one of your events or one of our events, but you want to share with them now? What's one thing that you think that they're not really paying attention to that they should be?
Well, I will say, in this rapidly changing environment, like I said, the cycles are a lot shorter than I think they were pre-pandemic. One of the things I see both internally at CBIA and with a lot of companies I'm talking to is I don't think enough people realize what got you here today is not going to get you there tomorrow. I used to call it, you're underestimating how fast what made us successful is expiring. It expires. Nowadays, it expires very quickly. The expiration date, it's like more like a milk carton than it is a can of soup. And a decade ago, I think what got you here today may have gotten you to tomorrow a little longer, but it expires so quickly with technology, competition, a lot of people starting their own businesses. And so that's the one thing where I think business owners just often list, it's not that they're resting on their laurels, but they're like, well, hey, we've got a really successful mission. We've got a really successful product, and we got a successful team, but there's not a lot of depth maybe to that team. And so they're not investing enough in leadership depth. And really the biggest long-term risk isn't the market disruption, it's leadership fragility. I just see too many of the senior team leave, and all of a sudden the CEO realizes, I didn't have a lot of depth, and what got us here today isn't going to get us there tomorrow, because I need to bring in a whole new leadership team, and it takes them a while to connect. And so I do tell leaders, go ahead and spend an extra dollar to create some depth on your leadership team. I think it's equally, if not more important, than that next piece of equipment or that next building that you're going to do or the next product line that you're going to fire off. Leadership fragility is a big thing.
Well, you use the word invest, and really that's what you're doing. You're investing in your leadership team, your management team, and they can have as big an impact as a new piece of machinery that you're putting on the floor. Probably more, especially when it comes to trying to continue to evolve with whatever the landscape looks like, a competitive landscape, even exit planning. You need to have that strong leadership team. And I think far too often, our experience has been far too often what I hear people talk about, it's really expensive to hire a CFO these days. It's a lot more expensive to not hire a CFO these days. So, all right. So you got another one, Kevin?
Chris, again, it's not lost on me that you are that external, and I say you, I mean CBIA. Sorry for I guess the plug, but you deserve it, and your team deserves it. And for those of us, and we were there once, maybe we still are, and we're blind to it, but not really knowing where to turn. Right? You're so busy, you're just hunkered down, and you think you're doing all the right things, and the right thing is to spend 15 hours in with a closed door, head down, working hard. And it's been folks like you, CBIA, certainly, that has helped us literally, and I mean that sincerely, right? Get out there more and realize some issues that maybe we wouldn't have otherwise realized, make connections with people that we wouldn't have made connections with. And it's one of those, it's hard to know until you see it, and then you feel a little bit part of a community, and you're all there together. Whether you're in financial services or personal service firm like ours, or a manufacturing firm, which are extremely different, and yet in so many other ways they're not at all. Right? We need leaders, and we need to make good decisions, and we need to be thoughtful, and we need to care deeply about our teams, and so on and so forth, and think beyond just today and not just Friday. So yeah, really appreciate the effort that you're making, the effort that CBIA is making, and I think you have lifelong supporters here. I joked to you about running for governor, and yes, it's a little bit of a joke, but it's also because it's sincerely, you're a great leader, Chris, and those of us that many people in the state know that, and many don't, and if you don't, you should take a peek at CBIA. You're doing good things.
Yeah, Chris, I love the most recent videos you've done have been awesome. You're clearly a ham, and who knew that you were such a ham? You do those videos so well. All right, so I'm going to wrap us up a little bit here. I think I'm going to try to wrap us up. If you could leave business owners who are hopefully listening and watching this with one piece of advice, something that you learned the hard way, something that maybe you did wrong that you could pass on to somebody, what would that one piece of advice be?
Oh, great question. There's so many pieces of advice, right? We could all pass on to each
Keep
other.
it to the legal. Keep it to the legal stuff, Chris, not the illegal.
Okay.
This is being recorded.
Don't let your staff do holiday videos and make you do whatever's in the script. I mean, the one, I guess, if I were to kind of sum it up in one thing that I, over the times, and finally, if I were where I am today, if I went back 25 years ago and told this to my younger self, is you got to build a business so it doesn't depend on you. I miss so many family events. I stressed over so many decisions. I think, Dennis, you mentioned lonely at the top. Too often I mistake my involvement for being impact, and the confusing the responsibility of owning every decision. And, I think there was a book I read or something that said something around the line that if you're the smartest or busiest person in the room every day, then the system is broken. Even if the results look good, the system is broken, right? If you're that smartest or busiest person in the room, because you may think you own the business, but sure enough, the business owns you if you have to be involved in everything. And so, trusting others, building strong teams is definitely a subset of, building the business so it doesn't depend on you. And I'm fortunate. That's where we are at CBIA. And I think we got there at Pegasus, but we're definitely here at CBIA. And I think that's why I'm just kind of enjoying it so much. We rolled out the entrepreneur operating system. I know you guys use EOS, and when I was told, they're like, hey, you should be, the visionary. I don't know if you're the integrator. I was like, whoa, I can't. Am I taking my hands off the wheel? I didn't even think about it for a second. I was like, great, go with it, run with it. I'm in a different place in my life where I don't need to be involved in every decision. You guys have heard me. I joke about this. It's somewhat sarcastic, but there's some truth into this. I often say to people, hey, I just go where the team tells me to go. I wear what they tell me to wear, and I say what they tell me to say. And while there's sarcasm there is some truth to that. I mean, because CBIA is not about me. It's about the members. It's really about the staff driving towards that mission because they care about the members so much. They want to make Connecticut such a great place for the business community because they know if the business community is doing well, the residents of the state do well. And so, building that business so that it doesn't depend on me. It's been great to do here at CBIA. I think it took me too long to do that at Pegasus, but we eventually got there. And that's what I would recommend to any business owner at any age. The earlier you could do that, the happier you're going to do that, and the more successful your business is going to be.
And it's pretty telling that you're saying that, because right, you would not go where they tell you to go and wear what they say and say what they tell you to say and wear what they tell you to wear if you didn't have faith in the people, right? So you've done what you said. Clearly you've created a team that you feel like you can rely on. So again, kudos there.
Yeah. Trust others, get out of their way, build the business so it doesn't depend on you. That's awesome. That's great.
No doubt about it, right? And it's easy to do when you have a great team. It's easy to do when you have great customers. In our case, our members. It's great to, we have a fantastic board, policy council, different member segments. It's just that collaborative spirit, that relationship, man. It makes a difference, just personally and professionally. I got the greatest job in the world. I mean, it's not a job. I am just so fortunate to have, and somehow this path of life from trial attorney to manufacturer to publicly traded company got me here. And like I said, there's some interesting similarities between what I'm doing today and what we were doing at Pegasus. But I'm just very fortunate to have folks like you involved.
Awesome. No, we appreciate you very much. Your friendship, what CBIA does is awesome. And if people happen to be watching and they're not involved in CBIA, you're missing out, because the passion of the staff is awesome. The passion of the other members, the desire to build that community is phenomenal. It's one of the best I would say it's one of the best things about my professional experience has been being involved in CBIA. So thanks, Chris.
Have fun along the way. We have fun along the way.
A little bit.
Amen.
So we're going to wrap it up. I want to let folks know that we are going to have we have an in-person In Good Company events every other month. And we have another one that is scheduled for March 19th. Kevin, that'll give you 2 days to recover from your drunkenness on St. Patrick's Day. So March 19th, we're going to be hosting an In Good Company event here in our office, and we're going to be talking about AI. We're going to have a speaker come in and talk about AI, how it relates to manufacturing, service organizations, you name it, and how to maybe tackle the whole issue. But it's something that everyone is thinking about, and everyone is at least starting to invest in it. So, but hey, Chris, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Great to see you as always. Kevin, good to see you as always.
Dennis, my favorite time of the day is when I see you.
Thank you. All right. Appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.